Hi, my name is P. Marvelson, and continuing the video, part 2 of classic narcissistic personality. And I wanted to talk about in this video also, the last video, I talked about some of the basic things that you will see in a narcissistic personality to identify. The first one was the ego, where they need to be right, the need to feel good about themselves or brag or overconfidence. Many times they're stating their accomplishments, things like that. The second thing was manipulation. You'll see a lot of manipulation with classic narcissistic personality. Between you, if you're in a relationship with this person, you'll start to see manipulation. But like I said in the last video, it's very subtle. It's very, in the beginning, it's very sneaky, and you don't always see it, especially if you don't think manipulative. You're not going to see it. A lot of people have to kind of mature and learn how to think in a way that's hard for them, especially like empaths and things like that, to sometimes beat a manipulative person like a narcissistic personality and overcome that relationship, because it's really hard to understand how someone can kind of think in that way when you don't. It's almost like a foreign thing to some people that are not very manipulative in their own thinking. And the third thing was the lack of empathy or no empathy, that is putting themselves in someone else's shoes, thinking about the other person, thinking about how that person feels, what maybe is going on with that other person. Especially when you go in conflict, you'll see that, a lot of times that is normal too, that a lot of people, when they go in conflict, they think about, well, what about me? What about my feelings? And a good, over time, maturity, it really helps to really stop and really think about, how is that person feeling right now? And yeah, they've said some things, but when I walked in the room, that person looks really miserable without me. And so what's going on behind the behavior of that person and how they feel about me? And so sometimes it's just a part of maturity of really kind of understanding that empathy. But a person with classic narcissistic personality that lacks no empathy, you will see a lot of times they just don't have where they, even throughout, like even when you're not in conflict, if the person never asks about your day, never seems to really care about what you're doing, is always focused on themselves, what they're doing, and there is a difference between being selfish and being narcissistic. Our society, and the more with the technology, everything's becoming personal, and everybody's kind of just a little bit more selfish in our day and age. I see this at work quite a bit, where everybody's just kind of focused on themselves, their own story. Everybody has a story. That saying, because everyone's fighting a hard battle. It really is true. But people that are a little more mature and that can really focus on other people, and also sometimes anxiety prevents us from focusing on other people because we're just trying to get through the day. And I know whenever I had anxiety years ago, it was just really about just trying to get through the day, get through that period. And I'll talk about anxiety in one of my other videos and how I came that. But And so some people with anxiety is kind of focused on themselves too. And so, like I said, it's really complicated, some of the selfishness stuff and the miscommunication and the misinformation out there about narcissistic personality, because there's these things that you will find, like I said, the ego, the manipulation, the lack of empathy, and the love bombing in the very beginning stage. And you can look at my last video for that. And then I also wanted to bring up, I had forgot to mention, that a lot of people with narcissistic personality also have what they call Dr. Jekyll, Mrs. Hyde, kind of where they switch personalities. So they can be really a certain way in public, but at home, switch out. And so, and it's really as though there's like two people. And that's very common with narcissistic personality as well. Like people at work might see one person, and then as your wife or as your husband, you might see a different person. And again, you have to kind of see if it's a pattern or not, because sometimes even depression can cause someone to kind of have different, personality switches like that, where they're up and down, or bipolar disorder can also cause that. And also sometimes, people even believe in, Geminis, where they have two different people, the twins. And I'm quite compatible with Geminis, and I have many friends that are Geminis, and I can say there's some truth to that a little bit, regardless of where you stand on the horoscope issue. But so there's so much to things. So, and it's so you have to really kind of look at, does it line up with this personality disorder? So I'm going to break down the criteria for that with the ego. So just a sense of self-importance, exaggerates achievements and talents, feels superior to others, is often preoccupied with fantasies of unlimited success, power, brilliance, beauty, and ideal love. That's why often, like I said, they are successful with employers and in their specialties. They believe that they're special and they're unique. They lack excessive admiration. They have a sense of entitlement. That's where you see a lot of times, I mentioned real briefly in my last video, the king archetype or the queen archetype for females. A lot of times you'll see those archetypes. I'm a writer also, and so under a different name, but I'm a writer, and I study archetypes sometimes so I can, with different characters and different personalities. They also lack, going back to empathy, they lack empathy. That is unwilling to define that. They're unwilling to recognize or identify with feelings and needs of others. Oftentimes they are envious of others, or believes that others are envious of him or her. They often show arrogance, haughty behaviors, and attitudes. Some studies and some research suggests that the way people become classic narcissistic personality, is through excessive admiration and the favorite child with their parents. They do no wrong. And overindulgent, and some say that's how it happens. And as they get older, they fail to recognize that others have feelings and needs. They're often impatient with others who want to talk about their problems and concerns. So often being married to someone with narcissistic personality, often in conflict, you will receive emotional coldness and lack of, them responding back to you. Oftentimes that's where the silent treatment comes in, and also gaslighting and manipulation. And a lot of times they will bring in a third party and sometimes criticize your name, and also often lie. Many times they are known to lie and make others believe that they're the victim and that, you've harshly done things to them or cheated on them, things like that. And that's how they manipulate. And finally, I'm going to sum it up with, they're very vulnerable in their self-esteem, actually. Even though they look like they have very high self-esteem and they're very confident, they're actually inside the self. They're very sensitive to injury from criticism or defeat. Most of us that mature and we get older, we know that constructive criticism is some of the best advice that we can sometimes get, and it can really change our lives and it can really help us grow. But people with narcissistic personality, they take it very sensitive, and they're very sensitive to criticism. They feel degraded, hollow, and empty. And oftentimes they'll react with disdain, rage, a counterattack. And so this is where you'll see them at work, have, counterattack, manipulation, socially withdraw. This is where the mask often comes in. They're just trying to protect that core self that is so vulnerable. And the problem also, the last thing I want to mention is the self-reflection. And that's really the key to a lot of times change and growth, is when we have our own self-reflection and we have our own self-awareness, we can really grow, we can really change and become better spouses, we can become better people, we can become better employers. And this is the biggest challenge sometimes, besides the lack of empathy with narcissistic personality disorder, is the lack of self-reflection of how they can change and grow. And many times when they start to feel that pressure of that, where they have to change, or they feel that someone has kind of discovered their self more, that's usually whenever they will discard their supply, that spouse, that girlfriend or that boyfriend, or husband or wife. Instead of doing the change, instead of doing the self-reflection, they're just gonna start again with someone that doesn't know that deep, and that can get that close to that pain and that hurt, and that's that core self that they have to protect at all cost. And so many times, if the spouse or the girlfriend or boyfriend backs off and kind of stays in denial, or just kind of lets the narcissistic personality do what they've always done and not push anymore for change or push for growth in the relationship, sometimes the narcissistic personality can settle for that. And they will continue the relationship. But anytime that you push for growth, a healthier relationship, things like that, it can become very overwhelming for a narcissistic personality, and they're going to start looking for another supply. They're going to start looking to replace you, most likely. And that's why many times they say one that always has narcissistic personality disorder, they usually have it for life. If they do become more self-aware of it, they can decrease some of the things, maybe, or learn how to have more empathy but it's going to become more of a learned behavior that they feel is worth that goal, reaching that goal for themselves for whatever reason. So it can be very challenging, and that's why a lot of times you'll hear people say, leave the relationship, you deserve better, because you're going to really go through a lot in the relationship. And you're going to become very conditioned and to try to not stir the pot, so to speak, and do the best you can. With my mom and my stepfather that are still married, and he's narcissistic, classic narcissistic personality. And she's a busy bee. She's definitely got the traditional roles as a woman, and she's always on schedule and always running around for him. And she did get him in church many, many years ago, but he just kind of used church as, to look like he's one of the top people that donate money, and they do have some money, and he's successful. And so, but over the years, their friends have seen different things, and she hasn't really been able to hide him as much as she thinks that she has, I think, and I think their religion has held them together, because they believe in staying married no matter what. Do I believe he's always been faithful? Based on what I've seen and heard, no, I do not. But, she chooses to stay with him. She believes that you stay married no matter what. And that's been his advantage in this. And he knows that about her. And he knows she's honest. And he knows that, she's going to stay married until something else happens, until either he leaves or he passes away or she passes away. So in those type of relationships, narcissistic personality disorder, they normally can stay married for a long time. But it is, it's been like a prison for my mom at times, and he's pretty controlling. And even just, we had went to a graduation, and, he made her drive, and he, he's very, he's a little sexist too, and traditional roles and stuff, but he made her drive, and he kept talking about the map and things like that. And then he was asking me, and it was like he was almost manipulating the both of us. I was in the back seat, and he was kind of manipulating both of us with the maps, and I knew what he was doing. But of course, with those type of people, calling it out is really pointless. At one time maybe I would have, but now it's, I'm just self-aware of it, so I can protect myself and not really fall into that stuff. But he was just kind of going back and forth, and then getting her lost so he can just complain and kind of give her a hard time. And then at the end, he was like, I know where it's at. It's right there. Just turn right there. And so I don't know what it is. He's had this thing with women and driving and maps and stuff. And so it was almost like he was pulling me in too. And that same day, something with a family member had me upset. And I was, a little teary-eyed in the backseat coming back from that trip. And I just remember, and they knew I was, and I just remember he had no concern for me like he always had. He didn't have any kind of empathy. He, of course, I was always the one that he just didn't care for. I was a sensitive empath child, so, I wasn't one of his favorites. But, so I just noticed that, again, it was just like no empathy at all. And it was okay. I was used to it. And I didn't really care. I was just, having a moment myself, for a family member that I cared about. So, But anyway, that just kind of sums up this second video on classic narcissistic personality. And I hope I help some. I try to make it a little more simpler and break it down. And I hope that I help you guys. And I'm going to end right here. And you're listening to P. Marvelson. And I hope you have a wonderful day and a great week. Thanks.